The information in this recording is general in nature and should not be considered personal advice. Please consult a professional and qualified financial advisor to discuss how this information may apply to your personal circumstances. Thanks for listening. Hi, it's Dane here from Own Financial Planning, and joining me today is John Stavliotis, Lead Portfolio Manager of the Antipodes Emerging Markets Fund. And today we're going to be talking about the opportunities that exist within emerging markets. So maybe starting high level, John, are you able to share what are emerging markets?
Yeah, no, thanks, Dane, for having me. So emerging markets is basically just determined on a number of factors, economic development being the main one. But also, when we think of an EM fund, it's also market accessibility, and sort of how you can invest in a certain market will determine if it's an EM or a DM. So then if you look across the universe, there's countries like, Philippines or Indonesia that are through a very fast pace of the economic development, but there's also countries like Taiwan and Korea that are included in emerging markets in our fund that economically are quite developed, but they're still there because of market access issues.
Sure.
And the way I'd sort of describe it very briefly is like 75–80% is countries in Asia. The other 20 to 25 is across Middle East, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America.
Sure.
And, the key, sorry that I keep going on, but the one thing is, the population of emerging markets is about 85% of the world's population.
Wow.
And from GDP perspective, it's about 45 to 50% of global GDP, and that's growing at 2 percentage points faster than advanced economies per annum.
Great. And there's some of the key characteristics that I imagine differentiate emerging markets from developed. Is there anything else that you want to add along those lines?
Look, I think that summarizes. It's really about, development, economic development. Populations are typically growing. That's another characteristic, which I've sort of mentioned. The last thing I'd say is like politics matters a lot more in emerging markets than advanced economies, although I wouldn't call politics and advanced economies that stable these days. But
Touche.
in EM, it can be more volatile, and that has a big issue because of the need for capital in emerging markets. It really varies with how stable the politics are at any one point. So when we're looking at different countries, we're typically looking for stable political scene, and also how the government is spending is very important.
Sure. And so as we sort of at the time of this recording, we've just ruled off the books on the 2024 financial year, and we've seen sort of the global mega caps really charge ahead, and I guess the emerging market space relatively has been somewhat subdued. Are you able to sort of share where you see the opportunities are for growth in emerging markets in the coming year or so?
Yeah. Look, I think it's a really interesting time in emerging markets. Like the thing I'd point out is EM governments have actually performed have been a lot more responsible in the last few years than developed economies. They've been spending less. Inflation is under control. So that means that EM policy settings are actually already turning more stimulatory. So we've seen a lot of EMs start to cut rates already. So that positions emerging markets to start, I guess, progressing into more of a growth cycle going into the next 12 months. And then, obviously global economy is starting to slow, but, if we do get rate cuts, that'll be the catalyst to get growth back, back on a global basis, which is important for exports, which is obviously a big driver of growth for EM. So we're kind of, quite optimistic on the growth outlook in emerging markets going forward after what's been a couple of tough years. And then when you think of equity returns, emerging markets have significantly derated in recent years. So we're actually now seeing emerging markets, or let's call it developed market premium over emerging markets, is at the highest level that it's been over 20 years. And I'll provide a chart that shows that. And then if you then break it down into different countries within EM, we've actually had the similar, consolidation of outperformance into a few areas, one being India and one being tech hardware in Taiwan in particular. So that has actually meant that a number of emerging markets are now at all-time low valuations, and China being the main one. So although the macro remains difficult there, the policy setting is more stimulatory there, and there's a lot of resilient businesses that are trading at all-time low valuations. So we actually think, from a valuation perspective, EM is actually standing out, quite attractive at the moment.
Fantastic. And so you're the lead portfolio manager with Antipodes EM Fund. Are you able to tell me a little bit about Antipodes generally, and I guess some of the characteristics of your emerging markets fund and how you differentiate from some of the other funds that are out there in the same space?
Yeah. So Antipodes, I'd sort of describe, in a few words. One is, pragmatic value, which is, what means that we care about price, but we're not wedded to only buying companies with low PE. We're looking for companies that we think are cheap relative to the growth and the resilience of the business. So that's a big distinction that we try to point out. We lead by industry research. So we do a lot of work looking at industries and get very deep in that analysis. And then we look quite broadly at finding the companies that give us the best way to express that from a risk-reward perspective. And the third thing I'd point out for Antipodes is really about team and how we do our research. We've got a broad research platform of close to 30 people in the investment team. That research at the industry level happens across all the teams that, me as one of the PMs for emerging markets in this instance can lean on to find the best ideas. So we've got an analyst that just looks at global tech hardware. We've got, someone that looks at global industrials that we can lean on, that knows all the US auto companies. So that's really how we look at things, and it sort of flows into your next question, which what's different about the Antipodes EM Fund is being able to leverage that global platform. We think is super powerful. You really can't analyze. TSMC is close to 10% of the EM benchmark, and you'd see it in most EM portfolios. We think it'd be very hard to benchmark if you were just looking at emerging market companies. Similarly, EV batteries, for example, would be very hard to analyze if you didn't have someone that was speaking to the US OEMs, the European OEMs, and understanding their EV strategy. So leveraging that global platform is one of our key competitive advantages. And then from a portfolio perspective, I think if you looked across the different options, a lot of people would tend to sort of, get wedded to one certain market, whether it be China, India, or whatever. We really try to look for opportunities across the whole emerging world. And at the moment, we're overweight China, we're underweight India, but we're not ignoring India. I spent 2 weeks there late last year, I think it was, looking for opportunities, but they're not currently providing the margin of safety that we're comfortable with to make an investment there. But we're looking for ideas across the countries and sectors that we see as attractive or mispriced at the moment. And you'll see our portfolio will transition to where we see the best opportunities. So I think in that regard, we're trying to provide a actual exposure to emerging markets, which when you think of your broader portfolio, EM in the short term will move with global risk, risk weightings and with, policy settings and growth assumptions. But over the long term, the growth that you're getting from EM is linked to that 85% of the population and 45% of the GDP. That's actually quite differentiated to developed markets. Yeah. So over the long term, you should actually get quite an uncorrelated return. And I guess that's what we're trying to provide through our fund.
Absolutely. So some great insights. Thank you, John. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about how we at Own Financial Planning utilise the Antipodes Emerging Markets Fund in our asset allocation strategies, you can contact us at ownfinancialplanning.com.au. Thanks for listening.